Inflation and deflation are opposites, and one of them is far more dangerous than the other. Most people assume it's the one making everything expensive. It isn't. Here's what's at stake. In the 4 years after 1929, American prices fell by about 27%, and a quarter of the country lost its job. Falling prices did that. So let's answer it plainly. Inflation is when the general level of prices across an economy is rising, so $1 buys you less than it did last year. Deflation is when the general level of prices is falling, so $1 buys you more. That's the whole difference. One erodes the value of your money, the other increases it. And that is why deflation sounds like good news. Cheaper groceries, cheaper rent, cheaper everything. Who's complaining? Central banks are. Every major one on the planet spends its entire existence trying to keep prices rising by a small amount every single year and running from the alternative. That's the part nobody explains. So here's what you'll have by the end. You'll know why American prices genuinely dropped last month and it still wasn't deflation. And you'll know where that famous 2% target came from, which is one of the stranger stories in modern economics. It starts with an off-the-cuff remark on New Zealand television. Start with inflation, because it's the one you already feel. Inflation isn't the price of one thing going up. Your coffee getting more expensive isn't inflation. Inflation is the average price level across the whole economy moving up together. Statisticians measure it by tracking a basket of thousands of goods and services, then reporting what that basket costs compared with a year ago. In the United States, that basket is the Consumer Price Index. In June of 2026, it came in 3.5% above where it was a year earlier. The same shopping trip cost you 3.5% more than it did last summer. Now flip it around, because this is the part that matters. Inflation isn't really a story about prices, it's a story about your money. If prices rise 3.5% and your pay doesn't move, you didn't stay level. You took a pay cut, you just never got a letter about it. Deflation is the mirror image, and it's rarer than people think. Deflation is a sustained fall in the general price level. Not one sale, not one cheap month, the whole basket going down and staying down. When that happens, your money quietly gains value, and the $100 sitting in your account buys more in December than it did in June. Here's where almost everyone gets tripped up, and it happened this year. In June of 2026, American consumer prices fell 0.4% in a single month, the biggest monthly drop since April of 2020. Headlines everywhere said prices are falling. But annual inflation was still 3.5%. Prices were still far higher than a year before. 1 month down inside a year that's up is not deflation. There's a word for what that actually was: disinflation. Disinflation is inflation slowing down while staying positive. Prices are still climbing, just less steeply. Deflation is prices going the other way entirely. That distinction sounds like word games. It isn't. Central banks celebrate disinflation and panic at deflation, and now you know why they're not the same event. So why the panic? If my money buys more, surely that's a win. For you personally, on one shopping trip, yes. For an economy, no. And the reason is that people are not stupid. Imagine you're about to replace your car, and you've noticed cars got cheaper this year. Not on sale. Actually cheaper. What do? You wait. Waiting is free money. So you wait, and your neighbor waits, and a few million other people wait. Now the dealer has a problem. Nobody is buying. So he cuts prices further to shift stock, which proves everyone right for waiting, so they wait some more. That's a deflationary spiral, and it feeds itself. Falling prices cause delayed spending. Delayed spending causes falling sales. Falling sales cause layoffs. Layoffs cause less spending still. Inflation punishes you for holding cash, so you spend and invest. Deflation rewards you for holding cash, so you sit on it. And an economy where everyone sits on their money stops being an economy. That's the trade. Mild inflation is a small tax on patience, and it keeps the whole thing moving. But the spiral isn't even the worst of it. The real damage happens somewhere most people never look: debt. Say you owe $200,000 on a mortgage, that number is fixed. It's written into a contract and it does not adjust for anything. Now, prices and wages across the economy fall 10%. Your debt didn't fall 10%. It's still exactly $200,000. But the money you earned to pay it just got harder to come by, and every dollar of it is worth more, which means it costs you more real effort to hand over. Your debt just got heavier without a single number changing. An American economist named Irving Fisher wrote about this while watching the 1930s happen around him. He called it debt deflation. Everyone tries to pay down debt at once. Paying down debt means spending less. Spending less pushes prices down further, which makes the remaining debt heavier again. Fisher's line was that the more the debtors pay, the more they owe. That's the trap, and it's why deflation and depressions keep turning up together. Which brings us to the clearest example there is. Between October of 1929 and the spring of 1933, American consumer prices fell about 27%. That is not a slowdown. That is more than a quarter of the entire price level gone in 3.5 years. And it was almost total. Economists who went back through the data found essentially no category of goods that escaped it. Food, clothing, housing, all sliding together. The rest followed exactly the shape you'd expect. Real output per person dropped by close to 30%. Unemployment went from roughly 3% to over 25%. 1 in 4 working Americans without a job. Now, deflation didn't single-handedly cause the depression. Bank failures and a collapsing money supply did enormous damage on their own. But the falling prices took a bad recession and welded it in place, because every month of falling prices made every existing debt heavier. That's the version everyone knows. There's a slower version that's arguably more useful because it happened to a rich, modern, functioning country, Japan. At the end of the 1980s, Japan had an asset bubble that's hard to overstate. Then it burst. Between late 1989 and the middle of 1992, the Japanese stock market fell around 60%. Land values kept sliding for years afterwards, down roughly 80% from their 1990 peak by the end of that decade. What followed got named the Lost Decade, then the Lost 2 Decades, then the Lost 3. And here's the detail that surprises people. Japan's deflation was tiny. From 1998 to 2012, cumulative consumer prices fell only about 4%. 4% spread across 14 years. Nothing remotely like 1933, but it never stopped. Inflation sat around 0 or slightly below for the better part of 20 years, and a whole generation grew up expecting prices to stay flat or fall. Once that expectation sets in, it is extremely hard to shift, and the Bank of Japan spent decades trying. So that's the second lesson. Deflation doesn't have to be violent to be destructive. It just has to be persistent. Now it gets interesting, because there is a version of falling prices that is genuinely good, and economists have a name for it. Look closer at why prices are falling. There are 2 completely different reasons. Bad deflation is a demand problem. People stop buying or money dries up and prices fall because the economy is shrinking underneath them. That's 1933 and that's Japan. Good deflation is a supply story in the best sense. Someone works out how to make the thing far more cheaply, so prices fall because there's more of it, not because there's less demand for it. Output climbs while prices come down. You have watched this happen. Flat-screen televisions launched at $3,000 to $4,000. Today, you can buy a better one for $600. Nobody calls that a crisis. Computers, solar panels, mobile phones, all the same story. Economists studying the late 1800s under the gold standard found long stretches of falling prices sitting alongside strong growth, for exactly this reason. So the question is never simply are prices falling, it's why. Falling because we got better at making things is progress. Falling because nobody can afford to buy things is a warning. Which leaves one loose end. If a little inflation keeps the machine moving and deflation is the danger, why 2%? Why not 1 or 4. There are real reasons for a small positive number. The way inflation is measured carries a slight upward bias, so a measured 2% is truly a little less than that. And a central bank needs interest rates high enough that it has room to cut them when trouble arrives. Aim at 0 and you're one bad quarter away from having nothing left to cut. But the specific number, the 2 that basically every rich country now targets, has an origin that is almost embarrassing. On the 1st of April 1988, New Zealand's Finance Minister, Roger Douglas, was doing a television interview. Asked about inflation, he said off the cuff that policy would aim to bring it down to around 0 or 0 to 1%. He hadn't cleared it with anybody. By all accounts, it surprised his own central bank as much as it surprised the public. But it had been said out loud, so the Reserve Bank of New Zealand had to make it real. Officials worked out that the measurement bias was around 0.75%, rounded it up to 1, and set the target as a band of 0 to 2%. New Zealand became the first country in the world with a legislated inflation target. It worked, and everybody else copied it. That upper bound is where the 2 comes from. A number the entire global monetary system now organizes itself around started life as an unscripted answer on New Zealand TV. So, the short version you can actually use. Inflation is prices rising and your money losing value. Deflation is prices falling and your money gaining value. Disinflation is inflation slowing down. And that's what most people are looking at when they think they're seeing deflation. Inflation is uncomfortable, and a central bank can fight it by raising rates. Deflation is dangerous and far harder to escape because it makes debt heavier and it pays people to do nothing. And the 2% everyone aims at is a compromise, far enough above 0 to stay clear of the spiral, low enough that you barely notice it year to year. Now here's what I'd like to know. If prices where you live fell 5% next year, would you spend more or would you wait to see if they fell further? Tell me honestly in the comments, because your answer is the entire reason central banks are frightened of deflation.